Hello. Welcome once more to Pastor Wale Speaks on Family Life. Today I'm talking about attitudes towards sex. Attitudes towards sex. Now, sex is a very important matter to families. And I'm not talking simply about sex between married couples. I'm talking about attitudes towards sex and sex education for children. Okay, that's a pretty important one. Welcome, Lillian, to this episode. I'm talking about attitudes towards sex. So, sex is very important to families. It's pretty critical for families, but I want to concentrate more on sex education for children because I find that they're somewhat lacking in that particular area. Now, many parents find it difficult to raise the subject of sex with their children and tend to leave it to the schools, but parents are far better placed to teach their children about sex than anybody else, whether it's church or school. So it's something that is really the parents' responsibility. Okay, so a lot of parents are shy. A lot of parents never talk to their children about anything to do with sex in their infant years as they were growing up, and then all of a sudden, the children are now in their mid-teens, and you want to tell them about menstruation. You want to tell them about adolescence and the changes in their body. It's too late. It's something that you should have taken up a long time ago. Now, sex education in children starts as soon as they can talk or understand. Don't wait until they're in school. As soon as they can talk or understand what they are being told, it's important to begin sex education. And I think one of the things that we must learn here is teach them to know if anybody attempts to touch their private parts, they know it is wrong. They can be taught in an age-appropriate way that my nose is not my nose. It's a public part. Anybody can see my nose. People can touch my nose. But my private parts are private. If anybody touches my private part, I'll scream, okay, because it's wrong. And talking about that, it's important that one doesn't use pet names for private parts. And I'll give you an explanation for that. There are many names that people use for private parts and don't want to use the name penis or to use the name vagina because it sounds crude, and that's a way of thinking. But the truth is that if you're going to teach your child sex education, use the real name for their parts, and this is why. If you use pet names, it becomes much more difficult to detect if another person in the household has used the pet name for your child's private part and has behaved inappropriately. You might not be able to detect it because your child doesn't know that you're talking about the same thing. Okay, so it's important that use real names, not pet names. And another thing that's important is that children are children, and the time will come when a child will ask, why am I different from my brother or my sister? Why do I look different? Why do I have different parts? And they should be told the truth and not fobbed off with some answer that doesn't really tell them the truth. The truth can be told children in an age-appropriate way. That's very important. You need to find a way that you can reach them at their level, not necessarily at your level or the level of an adult. Okay. So when a child does ask questions, try not to fob them off with an answer that's meaningless, but rather tell them the truth, but find an age-appropriate way of telling them the truth. I find that children love nursery rhymes. children love to learn how to sing songs. And we can teach them in an age-appropriate way through things like rhymes or songs. This is my nose, it's a public part. If anybody touches my nose, and so on. This is my ear, it's a public part. You can teach them about this so that they learn in a way that will stick in their minds. Remember, it's never too young. A child is never too young to begin learning about sex education. Remember, it must be in an age-appropriate way, otherwise it might drive fear into their heart. Many children have grown up to feel that sex is clandestine and something to be done in the dark or to be hidden away. Now, I am not saying, and please mind me, I am not saying that sex should be openly engaged in before children, no. But what I'm saying is that the children should not grow up to think that it is dirty and something that people do hide when they do it. Okay, it must be clearly made to be seen as an integral part of a marriage. Okay, they must learn to develop a healthy attitude towards sex. Otherwise, they'll always hide everything that has to do with sex. They'll never talk to you about sex. And sometimes children, unfortunately, in this day and age, are subject of abuse. And when they are abused, you won't get to know about it because they feel dirty. They feel that they've been desecrated. Is the word desecrated the right word? And so on. And so it's important that we train them, teach them to recognize that there's nothing unhealthy about sex, and it's not something to be hidden in the dark. Okay. Openness with children. When they do ask questions about sex, being open with them, again in an age-appropriate way, will help them grow up to be sexually healthy, and will also help them raise children that are also sexually healthy. Okay. Whatever children do not learn at home, you can be assured that they will learn from their peers or from others outside. You have no control over what your children learn. So regretfully, some of it may be harmful. So if you don't teach them, they're going to learn something. And what they learn may be negative, may be detrimental to them, may not help them have an active attitude towards sex in the future. So bear in mind, and do not shy away from belling the cat and actually talking to your children. I'm seeing a message here that says I have a poor network connection. I hope it eases quickly and then we can. No, but I will proceed because it hasn't stopped. Now, I'll talk about myself. My parents never gave me a sex education. They never actually engaged me. Just 1 second, I'm going to have to pause for a moment. I'm going to pause for just 1 moment. I'm back in a moment. Hello? 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 So sorry about that little interruption. Yeah, so where I was talking about children will learn, they will learn. My parents never gave me a sex education. They never talked to me about sex, but most of what I learned in school. Not necessarily in the biology class, but from the class of my peers. And it's important to actually broach these things with your children. They're simple things that a child would want to know. I mean, your child is going to get married one day, and your child is going to be involved in sex. And I'd hate to be a child who doesn't know what to do on their wedding day. okay? Because parents ought to have prepared them. A father should have taken his son aside and said, you know, this is what happens, and this is the way to go about it, blah, 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 blah. So I didn't get much of a sex education from my parents. The biology class can only teach you reproduction. It can't teach you about controlling your emotions. It can't teach you about learning to handle these emotions that come. It can't teach you about the fact that boys will, at some stage in their life, as they enter into puberty, have wet dreams. And, you know, these are things that you should learn from parents at home. Now, in my home, my wife took more time than I. She talked with her children. She talked with our children about things pertaining to sex. I didn't have that opportunity from my parents, and so it was difficult for me to pass it on to my own children. But we still maintain an attitude of openness, and so the children come, they can talk about, we try to be able to talk about anything, okay? Now, just imagine this. It would be tragic if a female child had to face her first menses without having been prepared for it. And unfortunately, many children have. And I know some people who were brought up by a father because the mother had either passed or there'd been a breakup in the relationship, and the father had custody, and fathers are not really always the best place to teach their daughters about sex. But just imagine what it would be like for a young girl, maybe at the age of puberty, I'm talking about 12, 13, and probably even younger, suddenly seeing menses and not having any idea what it is. So children need to be prepared. And this is not necessarily preparation that happens at school or in church. It should be happening at home, okay? Now, I agree entirely with the notion, with the thought that sex education or sexual intercourse is private. It should remain behind closed doors. I want to say it is nothing to be ashamed of. And that is the way a generation has thought. It's something to be ashamed of. And so couples wait until their children have all gone to sleep, and yeah, that's fine. And then they keep any noise. They don't want any children to hear what's going on in the room. It's important for your children to know that you love each other. It's important for your children to know that they actually love each other and that you actually make love to one another from time to time. So it's nothing to be ashamed of, like a generation used to think. So as I said, it's not unhealthy for children to hear their parents having sex. In fact, it will be helpful for them to know that their parents have a happy relationship. A father should also be able to give his son practical tips to prepare them for their sex lives in their own marriages. These are the important things that we shouldn't discard. The father should also be able to give his sons practical tips to prepare them for their sex lives and in their own marriages. There are many things that can enrich the sex lives of couples. The most important is that each partner must be on a mission to give pleasure to the other partner. You know, we live in a generation of biff, bam, thank you, ma'am. And the whole idea of sex is about giving pleasure to your partner. And the child must learn this at an age appropriate time, you know, must be learned to be able to do this. I'm going away from children right now. I'm going to talk about one or two things about the couple before I bring this to an end. a couple are there to give each other pleasure. So sex is about giving pleasure to the other partner. So you must constantly be trying to discover what pleases your partner, and what is the way, and the best way to discover what pleases your partner is to ask. You know, I've had lots of discussions with congregation members about things like oral sex and so on and so forth, and some people will come and say, well, there's nothing that forbids oral sex in the Bible. Some people say, no, it's dirty, it's filthy, it's not natural. And I say, look, if both of you consent to it, then, you know, go ahead. But it must be with the consent of both of you. If one party is reluctant and doesn't want it, then it's not. Again, don't be preoccupied with climaxing yourself, but consider bringing your partner to a climax. And this goes most for the men. Sex must not be selfish. Again, last thing I'll say is it must not become monotonous. It so easily can. It must not become monotonous, but vary things from time to time, so that there's a lot more. There's change. There's more fun. Okay. So that's today's episode. It's pretty short. I hope that the interruptions didn't make it difficult for you to follow, but I'm going to post this as soon as I've concluded it. I want to say thank you to those that have joined in. I see Rita Akindojo has been watching. Thank you for coming in. Lillian, I guess you're still there. Thank you for coming in. Whoever else is watching, please join us again next week when I have another podcast or webcast at 4 p.m. Tuesday evening. So until then, stay mightily blessed. Have a great evening, and God bless you. See you next week.